Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Erin Forey, and I'll be the moderator for this Lessons in Leadership webinar series. We only have 30 minutes today and a lot of information to share. So today's title is Improving Teamwork, Communication, and Productivity with DISC. And I'd like to welcome Jeremy Triplett, the Lab Director of the Kentucky State Police Central Laboratory.
Thank you so much, Erin. I appreciate it. Can you just let me know that you can hear me so I don't take off?
I can hear you. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me to speak on this, and thank you to the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence for the chance to talk about DISC. It's an interesting topic I've been interested in for a while, but only recently in the past couple of years have I kind of dug deeply into it. Before I get going, I just want to start with a couple quick notes. First, of course, the obligatory, anything I say is solely my opinion. It doesn't reflect the views of the FTCOE, NIJ, or the Kentucky State Police. So if I say something really stupid, that's totally on me. And second, DISC is a huge topic. And, you know, we have a short time here together. That was not where I was intending to go. So DISC is a huge topic, and we only have a short time together today. So I'm going to give you a really high-level overview, and I'm kind of going to be barreling through a lot of content. But I would just encourage you that the point is just to kind of introduce you to the idea if you've not heard it before. And if you find it interesting, you know, I encourage you to check it out, do some research. There's a ton of resources on DISC available out there. Some are paid, some are free. So, but there's a lot of information. So if you find it interesting, I certainly encourage you to jump in. I appear to be not succeeding in advancing slides, but here we go. All right, so when you think about your workplace and your colleagues, wouldn't it be nice if everyone's strengths and weaknesses were just written on them like a name tag and they just kind of wore it around? Or wouldn't it be nice if everyone kind of walked around with a little halo that floats right above your employee's head, and it shows exactly what they're great at and exactly what they might need help with? Or in another way, have you ever just had one of those days where you just sit back and wonder, why in the world do people do what they do? Why do they respond the way they do? Why do they act the way they do? Why is it that such a bunch of intelligent individuals can look at the same situations so differently? Well, if you've thought about that, it turns out you're not alone. For centuries, psychologists have been asking some of those same questions about what is personality and how does it influence human behavior. And for about as long as they've been talking about the concept of personality, they've also been developing instruments to help evaluate it and sort of assess your and others' personalities. So I'm not going to read it to you. We have a short time, but here's a little brief history of time on personality. This goes back centuries to Hippocrates, where originally they thought maybe the relative abundance of different fluids in the body caused personality. In the 1700s, psychologist Franz Gall said you could perhaps ascertain someone's personality by observing the bumps on their head. We got a little bit better in the 1900s, and some of our more modern interpretation arose. In the early 1900s, you have Isabel Briggs-Myers with her mother, who started work on the Myers-Briggs type inventory, which you probably have heard a lot about. Carl Jung sort of entered the chat in 1921 with a pretty seminal work, Psychological Types and the Psychology of Individualization. And a lot of the instruments that you hear out today, DISC is one of them, and the Big Five, started development in early 1900s or mid 1900s. And today, if you scroll Facebook or whatever social media you're out there, you have any number of surveys or assessments that claim to tell you all about yourself, from what your ideal occupation might be to which Disney princess you're most like, or villain, I guess. It depends on your disposition. I tend to always get Jafar. But anyway, today in the workplace, we tend to see about 5 major personality assessments, and those are DISC, Myers-Briggs, the Big Five, Gallup StrengthsFinder, and Enneagram. So, and while some of the assessments are pretty complex, others are pretty straightforward. So just as a demonstration, let's do a quick exercise at your desk. We won't take a ton of time, but just answer this question to yourself in just a few short seconds. Your ideal workplace, would you rather have lots of time to collaborate or lots of autonomy? Your ideal workplace. Collaborate or autonomy? All right. What about this question? In your ideal workplace, would you rather make decisions quickly or would you like to think things through? Quick decisions or think things through? Well, although the assessment is a little more complex than this, if you plot these two questions on a vertical and a horizontal axis, you get the very basics of DISC. And I'm sure it'll not surprise anyone to hear that your workplace is made up of coworkers or bosses and employees with all four of the potential answer combinations of those two questions. But it's in these differences in preferences that we sometimes butt heads in the workplace with our coworkers or our bosses or our employees. The vast majority of time when conflict arises or when there are big issues that just seem to continue to resurface, it's not about good people or bad people, but it's about personality differences and communication preferences. And so why would I say communication preferences? Well, communication between multiple individuals is really where the differences in your DISC style are most readily apparent. If you spend any amount of time in the workforce, you probably know that communication is almost always the source of conflict and poor workplace environments. So I really like this graphic. We won't go too much in depth, but Ronald Adler published this, and I really like it. And it just shows for us that communication is not a simple process. There's a lot going on, and communication doesn't happen in a vacuum. So the message that communicator 1 is sending to communicator 2 doesn't just soar through unfiltered. It's not like we were in a particle accelerator, the particles just screaming through with no outside influences. The purple shading represents communicator 1's background and life experiences and personality. And that affects how they communicate. And the same is true for the blue shading. That is the life experiences and personality and preferences of communicator 2. And it's not enough that we have two different worldviews and perspectives and experiences that this message has to filter through, but we've got external noise too. And so it's no surprise that when we try to communicate a message, sometimes it bounces around and just doesn't land. So when we want to improve our communication, it's this perspective we've got to understand first. If we want to build more effective work relationships, we have to develop our own emotional intelligence to increase that overlap space, the purple and white striped space, and move ourselves into that region of overlap so that the receiver interprets the message that we're trying to send in the way we intended it to. So how in the world do we do this? If I'm just talking, you're saying I've got to walk down the hallway and like do this every time. Well, the first part of understanding how to do this really starts with understanding ourselves. What is our own personality? And then we must seek to understand others and their personality and how it influences the way they take in communication. And so DISC is an interesting and helpful tool to start doing that. So let's go back quickly to this oversimplified version of the DISC model and ask the questions in a different way. So I want you also think again at your desk how you see yourself. Do you see yourself as fast-paced and outspoken, or do you see yourself as more cautious and reflective? And so be careful. It's not how you want to see yourself or how you aspire to be or how you wish you were. How do you really see yourself? All right, fast-paced, outspoken, cautious, and reflective. All right, so we probably have a bunch of people in the audience that are in two groups now in your mind, not in person. We have a fast-paced, outspoken group and a cautious and reflective group. What about this question? So independent from the first one, do you see yourself as questioning and skeptical or accepting and warm? Questioning and skeptical or accepting and warm. Well, now we have a new set of two groups probably in the audience. And if we were in person, we might stand up and kind of move in different parts of the room so we can see this better, but you kind of have to imagine, I guess, on a webinar. So you can probably imagine now in your new group, your questioning and skeptical or accepting and warm group, you probably have some of the same people in your group that you did before in the fast-paced and outspoken or the cautious and reflective group. You probably have the same people. They answer the questions the same way. But you probably also have new group members. You probably have people in your group now who answered the question differently the first time around. So what happens if we combine those answers? All right. Well, what we get is probably 4 groups, the combination of questioning, skeptical, accepting and warm, and fast-paced, outspoken, cautious, and reflective. And I would say with an audience as big as this, we probably have several people in every single group right now. Well, these 4 groups, this is a very rough estimation, but these 4 groups represent the 4 DISC styles. And so give a little disclaimer, those 2 questions are not going to get this perfect. The DISC assessment is a validated psychometric tool. It has many more questions and it's much more rigorous. So I'm not going to say we've definitely found, which group you would be in if you took the test, but it's a rough estimate. All right. So what do the 4 groups represent in the DISC model? Well, if we overlay DISC onto this, we find that the questioning and skeptical, fast-paced and outspoken group usually fall into the D style, which stands for dominance. The fast-paced and outspoken and accepting and warm group tend to fall in the I group, I style, and that stands for influence. The cautious and reflective and accepting and warm group tends to fall in the S style, and that is steadiness. And lastly, the cautious and reflective and questioning and skeptical group falls into the C style, which is conscientiousness. So it's rough, it's an estimation, but just based on those 2 questions, it's a rough approximation of where you might land if you took the full DISC test. So keep that in mind for a second. And I'm going to talk about each style, and then we're going to do some examples. But first, it's important that DISC is not about stereotyping or pigeonholing people into, certain behaviors. Everyone tends to be a mix of all 4 styles. They just have some preference towards one or another. And all styles are valuable. It's not about highlighting the negative traits of different styles, and it's about understanding the preferences and tendencies of your coworkers and employees and improve your own communication. So it starts with you understanding first. DISC measures preferences and tendencies, but it's not really skill or ability. So that just because you have one style or another does not make you, mean you're going to be good at a certain job or bad at a certain job. Someone might say the S style may not be good at sales because they tend to not be as people focused and they're a little bit more reserved, but that's not true. It just means they have to be aware of themselves and they can still be successful in other roles. It's a tool for dialogue and not diagnosis. So let's look quickly at the 4 different styles and try to remember which one you kind of fell into. So the dominant style is sometimes described as direct or firm or strong-willed. They can be forceful and results-oriented. They value getting results, taking action, motivated by success, winning, competition. Their fears generally are loss of control or being taken advantage of. Some people describe them as self-confident, direct, forceful. But their limitations can be they can sometimes display a lack of concern for others because they're focused on getting tasks done. They can be impatient. What about influence? And I'd be interested in the chat. I don't know if it's over. I can't see it at the moment, but if you got sort of roughly placed into that and that hits home really hard, just say, yeah, man, that really tracks. That'd be interesting to see. What about the I style? The influence, they can be described as outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic. They value expressing their enthusiasm and encouraging collaboration. They love working together. Motivated by social recognition and friendly relationships. Their fears are social rejection, loss of influence. They can be described as charming, enthusiastic, sociable. But their limitations can be, they can be somewhat impulsive or disorganized. What about steadiness? Steadiness can be described as the steadiness style as even-tempered, accommodating, patient, and humble. They're really good at giving support and maintaining stability in an organization or project. They're motivated by stable environments and appreciation. They fear the loss of stability and loss of harmony in a team. They're sometimes described as being patient, team players, calm approach, a good listener. but their limitations can be, sometimes they can be overly accommodating, and sometimes they will avoid expressing their opinion, and they can be taken advantage of or just run over if you're not diligent in bringing out their opinions and asking for them. And then C, conscientiousness. Conscientiousness can be described as analytical, reserved, or precise. They value accuracy and challenging assumptions, motivated by opportunities to learn, attention to quality. They fear criticism or slipshod methods. They can be described as precise or analytical or skeptical. And their limitations can be, sometimes they're overly critical, or they can overanalyze. They can fall into that sort of analysis paralysis. And they can sometimes be isolate themselves. All right. So that's all great, Jeremy, but how does that really work in real life? Well, let's look at a couple examples of how knowing a DISC style can help in particular things that pop up in the workplace. So what about major organizational or process changes? Well, if that's going on in your workplace and you have all four styles, the dominant individuals are really good at driving that change. They will help you push forward and make changes. But they can be frustrated with setbacks or long timelines or constantly reevaluating or questioning. They just want to get it done. The influence styles and big changes, they'll rally the troops. They are your champions, your change champions. They will get everybody together, make sure we've got input, but they could be frustrated if you just sort of enact change by fiat and they don't get to kind of discuss and listen to everybody, debate the ideas. Your steadiness group will ensure harmony. They're really good at making sure everybody's feelings are heard and that no one leaves and kind of gets felt run over. They have a really good pulse on, people, whether they're unhappy or they want everyone to be happy with things as they go forward. But they can be frustrated in big change initiatives if it's really quick because they value stability. So you have to be careful. If you have people in steadiness, give them some time to think through the change and process it before you just enact it all of a sudden. And your conscientiousness group is really good at planning. They'll find all the flaws. They'll see all the steps you need to take to enact the change. But the challenges are that they could get frustrated if the change has to happen quickly, if they're rushed and they haven't had a time to evaluate it. What about conflict? That doesn't happen in the workplace, right? Of course it does. What do the different styles look like in workplace conflict? Well, the dominant style will get straight to the point. You won't have to wonder if they're upset. They go straight at it. But the risk is they can be too blunt and they can ignore the feelings of others. The influence style will be sure in conflict to make sure everybody's heard, get everyone's perspective, but they can be frustrated if everyone's not listened to, first off, and they also are very passionate and enthusiastic. So sometimes in a matter of conflict, when emotions are high, that enthusiasm can sometimes be mistaken for anger. The steadiness group will look for ways to accommodate everyone. They're great peacemakers in times of conflict. But the challenge is in it, of course, is that they may not express their own feelings. You may need to ask them. They may not volunteer them right off the bat. And sometimes they can submit too easily and get run over. And the conscientiousness crew, they'll evaluate conflict from all different sides. They'll break it down logically and find, all the flaws. But that can also be their downfall. And I speak to this from personal experience. I'm a high C. Sometimes we can focus too much on logic, and it makes sense because of the logic and completely ignore people's feelings. All right. So at the end of the day, those are a couple examples. What we want to do is understand ourselves first, and then try to understand our coworkers' perspectives. And that way we can communicate in a way that builds relationships and understanding. So very quickly, with the time we have left, let's look at a real world example with my DISC style and a style of my colleague, Kyle. So how can DISC help me in different aspects of work build better relationships with Kyle? Well, what do we see? I'm a CD, so I prioritize challenge, accuracy, and results. Kyle is an ID, and so he prioritizes action and enthusiasm and collaboration. How might this play out? We're similar in some ways. We're challenging. We love a good debate. We both tend to take the lead, but the difference is I tend to take a low profile and Kyle tends to keep a high profile. I'm frank. Kyle's tactful. I'm calm sometimes. Kyle is energetic. So how might we look at these differences with particular things that arise in the workplace? Well, what if things get tense? Well, Kyle's I style values collegiality and cooperation. If things get tense, I need to make sure I try to work with Kyle, listen to him, hear his opinions, and give him room to express his thoughts, and really probably collaborate with others and get their thoughts too on a solution, rather than just walking in and saying, here's what we're going to do. I tend to be straightforward. Kyle tends to be tactful. So I have to be aware of that. If I'm going in and tensions are high and I need to talk to Kyle, I need to realize that my straightforwardness can sometimes come across as being blunt or rude. And so keep that in mind. What about if I'm just trying to build a relationship with a new employee or a new coworker? How would I connect if I know I'm a CD and Kyle's an ID? Well, being an ID, Kyle's going to be very sociable by nature. It's not going to take me, begging him to open up. So that's a good thing. But because Kyle tends to want to talk and engage in communication all the time, and I tend to want to just step back and create some personal space, Kyle could feel like when we're trying to connect, I'm not interested in, speaking to him, or he could be less willing to approach me with things just because that's the disposition I give off. And I have to be aware of that and make sure I'm not just, reading that on my face. What if we're working on a project together? And this is maybe the most, tactical thing to keep track of is we have projects and we have people of all different styles. Well, Kyle's an I, he's going to tend to improvise. I'm a C, I'm going to want to see it logically laid out in like 14 Excel spreadsheets and a huge Gantt chart. If we're going to work together on this, what I need to do is I still need a timeline, but I've got to build in some time for Kyle to iterate on these ideas and maybe discuss the ideas with colleagues and bring in some other people. I can't just be like, we're going to do this day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Kyle needs some time to sort of iterate on it and get some other people's opinions. Again, also Kyle tends towards the getting things done and I tend toward the let's think about it a little bit longer. So if I continue to want to think about it and keep raising objections and finding flaws, Kyle could be very frustrated. So if we're going to project, I need to realize when enough is enough and let's go ahead. What about buy-in? This is the last one. Buy-in from Kyle is most readily achieved by letting him discuss, letting him think about it. But Kyle is flipped in a different way. Kyle as an ID could be a change for champion. So knowing that Kyle is enthusiastic and he's a people person, Kyle is a great person to help me champion change. And so that's a way we can use the different strengths from DISC styles with different aspects in the workplace. If I want to get buy-in from Kyle, I need to let him shop the idea. I want more data, but Kyle wants to get more perspective. So I've got to keep that in mind. But as an I, once we've made a decision, Kyle will rally the troops and he'll do it enthusiastically. And so I just need to give him space to do it. A little bit of structure on how and when, and just let him work his magic. Okay. So that was a ton and a very short time frame. I understand. But that's about all the time we have today. This is just meant for an appetizer. I hope you find it interesting and maybe interested in kind of doing a little more research on your own. We talked about the basics of DISC. We talked about a general idea of what DISC style you might be and what different styles prefer in work. We looked at a couple examples of real life situations and we compared my profile with a colleague, Kyle. So take-home message is multiple communication styles are present in every workforce. Effective communication only happens when the receiver gets the message in the way you intended it. You can do that by considering the preferred communication style of your coworkers. And DISC is a pretty interesting tool to help you understand yourself and others. Sorry, I have one more slide. So if you find it interesting, lots of resources out there. And of course, you're always welcome to email me if you want me to help you point you in the right direction.
Thank you, Jeremy. This coffee order slide is very interesting. It actually aligns with what I've actually typed to. So very, very good. We do have a few questions, so let me jump into that. Can you have a different communication style depending on the environment or situation you're in? For
Mm.
example, could you, maybe this could be two questions even, would you kind of be in one group at work among your work people and then a separate one when you're among friends or family?
So yeah, it's possible, but within some overarching general idea. So the research says you tend to be the same style in all places, and it doesn't change much. But context is everything. And so I wouldn't expect someone to be a high D at work and then just totally a high S at home. I could see them moving a little bit around the circle. Maybe they fall into, something closer. You wouldn't be expected to go all the way across, but you could, depending on the situation, sure. And I know even me, like there are times if I feel like I know what's going on, I can take the lead. But if I don't feel like as a C, I have all the information, I'm probably going to sit back because I don't want to say something I don't know what I'm talking about. So you shift a little bit, and environment can play a part of that.
And you talked about your style with just general leadership and then in conflict. Could you move from one style to the next when you're in a conflict situation versus like when things are going well situation?
Sure. So the research says you tend to stay one style, but that's the key skill actually is you will tend, and when people are like, I'm not really sure on some of these questions when they're doing the assessment, I usually ask them, well, think about what the answer would be when you're stressed, because that tends to be how you revert like to your default programming, so to speak. But the whole idea of DISC is that you resist that and you tailor the message to the style that's most effective for the person you're talking to. So yeah, the DISC literature would encourage you actually to be different in conflict. They would encourage you to recognize your default, recognize who you're talking to and what is important to them, and move in their direction so that you have a better connection and they more readily accept it. Yeah, it would encourage you to actually kind of step out of your style.
Another question that we have trending here is how do you implement this in your workplace? Any tips?
Yeah, so it's hard. You know, there are a variety of assessments out there. I'll just be, perfectly candid. Some of them cost money. I do think there's some free versions. I can't speak for how good or not they are. I only know the Wiley version, which is the official one. So it kind of depends on you. If you buy the test and you want to do with a small group, what I've done in my lab is before I was director, when I was supervisor, we just did it with my group. I was supervisor of drug chemistry, and we just did it with drug chemistry. And it's like, we can't change the world, but we can change ourselves. We can be aware of it. And so we implemented that way. There's some really good resources out there. They're free, kind of some style sheets you can find where it's just a cheat sheet. Like it's like if I'm a D, here's how I can best communicate with, an I, an S, and a C. And even if you just kind of keep that in your desk and you just the big win is just starting to think about it. But yeah, if you want to do it wholesale and do the assessments, there's some great products out there. I'm not here to sell anything today or anything like that. There's certainly things you can look at, but even just understanding it, understanding yourself can be a great start.
Have you ever run into issues with HR when you tried to implement this type of thing in your section? Or I'll even add on to that, like unions or anything like that.
Yeah, so we're not a union state, so I haven't had any of the union issue. I'm aware that that has happened. Not here. I have not. So the quick answer is no. I have not personally, but I am aware that that is an issue in some places. So you would need to make sure that you're sure that you're sure that that's okay. But yes, I have heard of stories where, you know, that sort of brings up a whole other question too. Like it's a culture question of this feels like a culture of blame because now you're going to look at the bad things about me rather than, we're trying to enhance communication. At some point it gets out of your hands and someone makes a decision. But hopefully I would try to get past the root block there, and that is that there's kind of a trust issue. If someone's going to say no, I'm going to take that to HR. But we all have different HR departments, and some are, you know, a little more hands-on, and some are not. So yeah, that's a long answer to I haven't, but I've heard that there have been.
And I'll ask one last question. You've worked with the DISC system for a really long time, and in your observation, what categories do forensic scientists seem to fall in? And then do the managers or people who are above maybe the general scientist, do they fall in another category?
Great question. So yeah, yes, I've been doing the DISC stuff for a while. Probably have almost 1,000 people that have taken the DISC test. And by and large, forensic scientists will come out in the C style. Vast majority will be in the C. It makes sense, right? Like they're skeptical and questioning. And you know, they tend to be cautious and reserved. So they're the perfectionists. The C are the perfectionists. Makes total sense. That said, of course, it's not a typecast, and it doesn't have anything to do with skill. So if you're not a C, it doesn't mean you're a bad forensic scientist. It's just, you know, yes, I've seen it, that there's a lot of C's. In management, no surprise, you have a lot of D's. They're the ones that tend to take action and you know, want to get things done. So yeah, it does tend to grade that way. Not say it's exclusive. We've seen plenty of people in all four styles.
Thank you. Well, we'll wrap up. Jeremy's contact information is here for those who would like to reach out to him. Please, if you wouldn't mind, take the follow-up survey, give us your feedback. If this is a topic that you'd like to learn more about, we'd love to know that. And so thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you all.
As you depart, we kindly ask that you take a minute or two to complete our post-event questionnaire. The link will be pasted in the chat and also appear as you exit the Zoom room. Your feedback helps us improve our outreach efforts and continue to provide the best experience possible. Thank you again for attending, and we hope everyone has a great day.